Hey everybody, I'm up here at the Mason-Dixon line at Mason-Dixon Park, an area famous for being the border between West Virginia, which is that way, my home state, and Pennsylvania, which is that way. This is, of course, a very steep hill we're about to go up. Whenever I ask people how I should train for the Appalachian Trail, experienced hikers tell me that I should find some flights of stairs and I should just put on my backpack, put some extra weight in it, and go up and down those stairs over and over and over again. And that's something that might be good for somebody who lives in like an urban environment where they don't have a ton of hills that they can just go out and climb up and down and up and down. But for me, I live in West Virginia, which is right in the Appalachian Mountains themselves. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to go up and down stairs. I can just find a hill and go up and down that. So that's what I've done. I'm here at Mason-Dixon Park, where there is a very steep hill. While we're on the trail today, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Appalachian Trail itself. I figure it would help to introduce it a little bit before I get on it next year. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about backpacking and the most important piece of gear you will ever have on the trail, and that is your backpack. Now, the idea for the Appalachian Trail came from a guy named Brenton McKay. In 1921, he was mourning the death of his wife. And a lot like me, he went to the woods to find some kind of solace, some kind of spiritual healing. And he had this eureka moment where he thought, why don't we have some giant trail that stretches from north to south and goes through a whole bunch of states. And he had this grand vision that it would have shelters along the way and little trail towns where you could resupply, and maybe even little learning centers, things like that. It was this kind of utopian idea for this trail that would unite all the states and give us all this appreciation for the outdoors and the wonders of nature. It was a pretty ambitious idea. It actually gained a lot of traction, and it wasn't until 2 years later, 1923, that they broke ground on the first portion of it up in New York. Only 2 years. Made it out of committee in 2 years. You gotta be kidding me. But the project was eventually taken over by this guy named Myron Avery, who was this juggernaut who really believed in the vision. But he really disagreed with Brenton McKay on how it should be done, and eventually they sort of went their separate ways, and Avery took over. Through the years, different parts were added, other parts were taken out, so it's always hard to tell how long the trail is at any given moment. People used to say it was 2,150 miles, then it was 2,175, now they say it's closer to 2,200, so it's hard to tell. And certain parts of it get rerouted every year because of natural disasters or floods or just good old-fashioned land disputes. Some people don't want the trail sort of running through their farmland or through their backyard. That's why you'll always hear me say approximately 2,200 miles. But by 1971, the trail had more or less evolved into its final form, into what it is today. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that I'm not remotely alone in trying to hike this trail. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy estimates that as many as 3,000 people attempt to hike it every year. So I'm in good company. Some of them, like me, are hitting the trail for the same reason that Brenton McKay came up with the trail. They're mourning somebody, they're grieving some kind of loss, they're looking for some kind of solace or solitude, some kind of spiritual healing out there in the woods. Now, the Appalachian Mountains themselves run from Newfoundland up in Canada all the way down to Alabama. In fact, they actually extend out into the ocean and onto some islands that are off the coast of the United States. Technically runs through 3 countries. They are among the oldest mountains in the world, and they are the oldest mountain range in North America, which makes sense if you look at younger mountain ranges like the Rockies or the Himalayas. They've got those steep peaks, those steep snowy peaks and those cliffs and those absolute sheer drop-offs. And that's the sort of stuff you get from younger mountain ranges. But the Appalachian Mountains have been here for so long that they've been weathered down. Older mountain ranges like this have kind of undergone a kind of geological balding process where they've been smoothed out and sort of rounded over by the erosion of years and years. So it's kind of neat being on one of the oldest geological features in the world. But don't let the fact that this mountain range is old fool you into thinking that it's not difficult. It has plenty of steep inclines, plenty of elevation change. All told, the trail also goes through 6 national parks, 8 national forests, and 2 national wildlife refuges. And that's another thing I'm looking forward to, is wildlife. I want to see a bear. I want to see a moose. Maybe, I don't know, a muskrat or something. That would be cool. Along the way, there are all kinds of little trail towns, little communities that have sort of built up around the trail. They've got hostels, they've got hotels, they've got outfitters, restaurants, everything that you really need to resupply and refuel every few days. Somewhere to relax, recuperate, do some laundry, get a shower, and maybe even just rest for a day or so before you get back out into the wilderness. So no matter where you are on the trail, you're rarely ever more than a few days hike away from a place where you can resupply, get medical attention if you need to, and rest up. One of my favorite authors, named Bill Bryson, wrote a book about the trail. It's called A Walk in the Woods. Now, he walked it with a friend of his in the 1990s, and I can't wait to follow in his footsteps. But he's far from being the only one who wrote a memoir about the trail. There are hundreds. The trail is sort of almost part of, you know, American lore and American legend. It sort of lives in the consciousness of outdoorsy people. Whew, getting absolutely soaked from the snow. Got snow coming in on top and sweat coming up from the bottom. Now, a lot of people start the trail in early March. March 1st is kind of the, I don't know, the unofficial start date of the hiking season for the southern part of the Appalachian Trail. I'm going to be starting a little bit later than that, in early April, possibly as late as mid-April. But I want to give myself enough time to recuperate in case I get injured or in case I get sick or some other kind of emergency happens. So I'm giving myself about 5 weeks of breathing room right now. But you do need to complete the trail before October 12th. That's when Mount Katahdin up in Maine closes down for the year due to weather concerns. So I have a limited amount of time to make this work. So let's put a pin in this for a minute and talk about undoubtedly the most important piece of gear you're going to need out on the trail, and that's your backpack. Now, if you look at this kind of backpack that you probably used whenever you were in school, some people called it a knapsack or a book bag. Unfortunately, it's sort of unsuitable for this kind of big multi-day expedition out into the wilderness. And there's a few different reasons for it. For one thing, it doesn't really have much structure to it. It's sort of flimsy, you know what I mean? If you were to fill this with 40 or 50 pounds worth of equipment, it would all sort of shift around as you're hiking. Some of it would sort of poke through the bag, poke you in the ribs, poke you in the back while you're hiking. More importantly, the bag is not going to want to stay on your back. Gravity is going to be pulling all that weight off of your back, and you're going to constantly be shrugging your shoulders forward and readjusting and wasting a lot of energy just trying to keep that thing on your back. The kind of backpack that you're going to need for this sort of expedition is going to have 3 things that a school bag like that isn't going to have. That's a frame, a waist strap, and a sternum strap. Some people call it a chest strap. Now, the frame is going to give it this sort of structural integrity. It's going to make sure that everything stays in place. And the straps are going to make sure that it all stays firmly on your back, so you're not constantly readjusting and shrugging your shoulders forward to keep it there. Now, the type of frame that a backpack has is going to define what sort of backpack it is. You've got internal frame backpacks and external frame backpacks. That's pretty self-explanatory. Internal frame backpacks have a frame that's not visible. It's on the inside of the structure. It's usually made out of fiberglass. Whereas an external frame backpack has one that's completely on the outside, it's completely visible. But you only really need to know about internal frame backpacks because unfortunately external frame backpacks aren't really made anymore. In fact, I could only find one reputable company that was still making a external frame backpack that you could order now. So unless you find an old external frame backpack at like a flea market or a yard sale, or maybe you inherit one from a relative, then chances are you're going to be dealing with internal frame backpacks for your expeditions. Now, first off, internal frame backpacks have just a lot of modern features that external frames aren't going to have. They're usually going to have a dedicated pouch for your hydration bladder, so you can keep it upright, and that way the tube isn't getting all tangled up with all of your equipment on the inside. They also often have a dedicated compartment just for your sleeping bag. This one has dual holders for your water bottles. It has built-in straps on the left side and the right side where you can put, say, your tent poles or your sleeping pad. Now, in general, internal frame backpacks are going to have a lot more padding. They're going to be a little bit more comfortable. They also hug much closer to the body. This helps keep them from shifting while you're hiking, and that helps keep you from being thrown off balance and falling over. They also tend to have a lower center of gravity. And these things make them a lot more popular with climbers, for instance. But through the years, they've become just the industry standard for backpackers and climbers and hikers of all kinds. Now, external frame packs are from sort of the old world of hiking, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They reigned supreme then. It wasn't really until the 90s that internal frame packs got really popular, and now that's pretty much all that you can find on the market. I think this is a real shame. I really like external frame packs. They're lighter than internal frame packs, which is sort of counterintuitive. You would think that this aluminum frame would make them heavier, but with internal frame packs you have all this extra padding, you have all these extra compartments, all these extra features, and those things are going to add up, and that's going to make them weigh a bit more. Also, when it comes to capacity, external frame packs are the way to go. Not only do they have more capacity inside the pack itself, but you also have this awesome frame on the outside that you can strap anything to. It's almost limited only by your imagination. It's especially great if something gets wet, like say some clothes, or say your tent gets especially wet. You can bundle it up and strap it to the outside of your pack and just let it dry throughout the day. It's not a perfect solution, but I think it's better than stuffing it inside of your backpack and getting everything else wet. And the main disadvantage with external frame packs is that they have a higher center of gravity, which makes it a little bit more likely that they'll shove you off balance. And they don't hug as closely to your body, and there's a higher chance that they're going to shift a little bit while you're hiking, which I find leads to a lot more readjusting while you're hiking, which takes some extra energy. But I find that just using a nice pair of trekking poles will help keep you from getting knocked off balance. So just keep that in mind if you plan on maybe going that route. Now, considering the fact that your backpack is the most important piece of gear you're taking with you, you don't want to compromise when it comes to quality, but fortunately a lot of companies these days are making pretty good quality internal frame backpacks. It's not like it used to be, how if you wanted to buy a good quality backpack it would really break the bank. Now these days you can get into the hobby pretty cheaply. Even like department stores like Walmart or Target actually have pretty good backpacks. My brother used one for years, it worked just fine for him. When it comes to expensive name brands, I'd say things like your tent are going to be more important in terms of investing more money and more research to make sure that you get something that's really going to work well when you're out in the field. But with backpacks, you honestly have a lot more flexibility when it comes to your budget. Now this is the internal frame backpack that I've taken on the vast majority of my trips. And as you can see, they've really put a lot of effort into making sure that the straps are comfortable. In comparison, if you look at this external frame backpack from the 90s, which I bought at a thrift store for $12, the straps are a lot more bare bones. Now ultimately, I'm not sure which of these two I'm going to be taking on the trail next year. I'm going to put them both through their paces over the next few months. Chances are I'll be going with the tried and true internal frame that I've taken on tons of expeditions before. But honestly, I'd really like to try to make the external frame work because I really like these things. Now, back to the trail. All right. Up the steeper part of the trail. Wow, it's cold up here. Well, as usual, the view was worth it up here at the top. It's weird, on the way up, the wind was crazy. I mean, I thought it was gonna blow me off the mountain. But then once I got close to the top, it all calmed down, and now it's really, really quiet and really serene up here. So that's our show. Thank you for joining us up here at the Mason-Dixon line. Next show, we're gonna go over more gear, more Appalachian mountain history, more history of the trail itself. We're gonna talk about tents, which are arguably the second most important piece of gear you're going to take out into the trail. And of course, they're more complicated than they sound, and I'm going to bring up all kinds of weird details that you never would have thought of and make it way more complicated than it needs to be. So I hope you'll join us. Thanks for watching. It's not that steep. I'm K. Edward Hewitt.